Hello, I'm Chris. Welcome to Flutter Engage Belgium. I'm glad that we are again together online, of course, during these COVID times. I also hope you are all okay. Yeah, all okay for COVID, of course. Flutter developers are nowadays having exciting times. Last week, everybody could watch the Flutter Engage keynote, where Flutter 2.0 was released. And maybe some of you also tried upgrading some of their apps. I also tried, and I can tell you that if your app is depending on a lot of dependencies, it's not that easy as they tell in the keynote. But of course, it's a work in progress, and everybody can probably fix their libraries. So tonight we have two talks on the agenda. Let's show them. The first speaker is Bram from In the Pocket. He will start with a recap on Flutter 2.0, and he will also talk about Navigator 2.0. What's that all about? And then the second speaker is Filip Hráček. I don't know if he already joined. I saw that it's 8 o'clock in the morning where he lives. So he's maybe still joining later on. But yeah, of course, who doesn't know him? He's a developer advocate on the Flutter team. You see a lot of stuff from him on YouTube, if you watch Flutter things. And he will do a Q&A section on this meetup. So thank you all for joining. I hope you have an inspiring session. So I will give the word to Bram.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to try to share my screen first. This one. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Let me start the presentation. Yeah, so welcome everyone to Flutter Engage Extended Belgium edition. I think that's what it's called. I'm going to talk to you about navigating through Flutter 2.0 with Navigator 2.0. But maybe first a bit about myself. I've been a Flutter developer for about 3 years now, so I've been with it since it was in beta. But I still get excited about new features, like the ones announced at Flutter Engaged last week. And that's why I decided to create a new project in about a week of time with some new features like Null Safety and also adding support for Flutter Web and Flutter Desktop, or at least macOS. And then also I was going to talk about Navigator 2.0. So I thought, why not add 3 different types of navigation to an example project? So the original Navigator, Navigator 2.0, and also Navigator 2.0 using a package. So let me show you the overview of the talk. So first, I'm going to introduce you to the example project. Second thing are my learnings from creating the project using new stuff from Flutter 2.0. Then we're going to talk about the 3 different types of navigation. So the original Navigator, Navigator 2.0, and the package we're going to use, AutoRoute. And then at the end, I'll share with you my conclusion, and you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions. So for the example project, I really like to watch TV shows, but they're spread everywhere across Netflix, HBO Max, Disney+. So the project I made is a simple TV show manager app that notifies you when new episodes are available of the shows that you like. So when you open it, you can see recent episodes of your favorite TV shows and also upcoming episodes. So the app has 4 screens. That is if you don't count the error 404 screen, but that one is only used on web. The login screen is the first one you see if you're not logged in. It's pretty basic. You just enter your username and password and you click sign in. Then the second screen you see is the home screen. It shows you your personal overview, so recent and upcoming episodes of all the TV shows that you like. Then when you click on a card, you can see more information about that episode. or yeah, it's not really more information, you just get a larger image, and also, again, the episode title, the release dates, and also a button you can click to show all episodes of that show. So on the third screen, if you click on show all episodes and you're on an episode of The Flash, you'll see all episodes of The Flash, all recent and upcoming episodes. If you look above the screens, you can see the routes they use. So the login screen just uses login. It doesn't have a /. The home screen is the route of the application. So its route is just the /. And then for the episode, it's / episodes with episode ID as a query parameter. And then for TV show, the same, but with TV show, with / TV show, and then the show name as query parameter. So I created this project with Null Safety and with web and macOS support. But first, let me show you a demo of what it looks like on macOS. So I'm going to stop the keynote right now. I already logged in, unfortunately, but you'll see the login screen later on when we talk about the navigation. So this is the home screen running on macOS. So if I make the window here bigger, you can see that the app is not really optimized for macOS. So I'm just going to make it a bit smaller for now. Now it's more like a tablet size. So you see your recent episodes and you can scroll through them. There's a couple of shows that I like, mostly superhero shows because I'm nerdy like that. When you click on one, you can see more details about it. And when you click on show all episodes, you go to a screen where you normally see recent and upcoming episodes, but unfortunately this show is over. So I'm just going to go back, click on this one, for example. And as you can see here, there are still upcoming episodes. And you also see a nice animation when you click on a card. That's also something to keep in mind for later. So that's a basic overview of the app. I'm just going to close it now. And then first, I'm going to share with you my learnings from using Flutter 2.0 to create a new project, because as Chris already said, it's kind of difficult to implement it in an existing project if you have a lot of dependencies. So I just started from a clean new project. And actually, the first thing I noticed is something quite small, but I like it a lot. Normally, if you're using name parameters and you want a required parameter, you have to use the @required keyword. And then also you need an import for Flutter Foundation or Flutter Material, for example. That's no longer needed. So you can drop the @ and you don't need an import anymore. So it's just baked into Dart now, which is really nice. I really like it a lot. And then the next thing, when I started experimenting with Null Safety, if you take a look at the code on the right, it's executed when you click the sign in button on the login screen. So first you check if the username or the password is null. If one of them is null, you show a message and you return. Let's say they both have a value, then a user object should be created. But there is a compile error here. The problem is that username and password are nullable types. And although we checked if they are null in the if check, when we try to create the user object, it still thinks that those types can be null because they're nullable. So how do we solve this issue? Well, all we actually have to do is assign the values of username and passwords to new variables, and then use them in the if check, and then also create the user object with those new variables. So what happened here? That's actually called type promotion. So we start off with a nullable string, but after the if check, Dart is clever enough to know that if one of them is null, that we return. So now we can just create our user object, no problem. Another example of the same problem is in a stream builder. So normally something you have is a snapshot, and you probably check if the data in it is null, or in this case, because it is an iterable, if it is empty. And if it is null or empty, you can just return a sized boxed or an empty container or something. But if there is data, in this case, you want to return a section widget. But the same problem occurs here. Snapshot data is nullable, and that's why we can't pass it to a section. So what do we need to do? Well, we create a new data variable and give it the value of snapshot data. And then if we use that in the if check, and in the section, it works without a problem. Then the next thing, I'm not sure if you know this package, it's called getIt. I think it's actually quite big, and it's used as a service locator for dependency injection. So it's something that we do. when using MVVM is create a view model, and the view model is created by a factory. And sometimes, for example, in the case of the TV show view model, we want to be able to pass the show name as a parameter. So as you can see in the image above, you can see the constructor for the TV show view model. And we have to use the factory param keywords before this .show name. A problem here is that we actually never want show name to be null, like ever, but we do have to make this type nullable in order for it to work. Otherwise, Gedit will complain that it's not a nullable type. So we actually don't want it to be able to be null, but we have to make it nullable to satisfy Gedit. And then RxDart is also a package that we use a lot. So it's basically a layer on top of Dart streams and stream controllers. And normally something you'd be able to do is episode subject.value to get the current value of the that's in the subject or the last emitted value. But now something that we have to do is actually use the value wrapper. So the value is wrapped in a value wrapper, and we have to call that first. So that's why it currently looks like episode subject.value wrapper. And then because it can be null, we have to use this null conditional operator before we can get its value. Then there are also new buttons. Normally you use a raised button if you want a button which has elevation and a nice material color. It's mostly the same apart from the styling. So normally you'd set the background color and the text color, but now we have to set a style. This is an easy way of doing it. You just copy the regular style of the elevated button, and then we can set primary, which is the background color, and on primary, which is the text color. If you want to use a state, for example, a disabled state for your button, it gets a bit more difficult. I didn't have to use it for this app, but long story short, the new buttons are a bit difficult. And snack bar messages. So I'm not sure if you've worked with those, but if you try to separate the logic as much away from the view as possible, you probably have something like a stream of events in a view model. And then every time you want to show a snack bar, you let the stream emit a new value, and then the view that is subscribed to the screen will see that there's a new event. And then you can probably use something like a scaffold key to show a snack bar. But that's not quite clean because then you still have some of the logic inside of the view. So now there is a better way of doing it thanks to the scaffold messenger state. So on the right, you can see that I created a simple service which has a messenger key and two functions, show snack bar and hide snack bar. I think that's easy enough to understand. But how do you use it? Well, in your route app, so in my case, in the root of your project, so in my case, the material app, we have to add the scaffold messenger key. And then in the function that you already saw before, the one in the login view model, we just have to call snackbar service.show snackbar. And that's it. Now there's no more logic inside of the view, which is really nice. And then last but not least, if you've ever worked with Flutter Web, you probably know that there's a hashtag in the URL at the very beginning, but now you can remove it. It's still there by default, but you have the option to remove it. There's a page in the Flutter documentation on it, but there's also a very easy to use package called URL strategy. And how you use it is that you just add it to your dependencies in the pubspec YAML file. And then before you call run app, you have to call the function set path URL strategy. So what this will do is just remove the hashtag from the URL. You don't have to do any special checks to see if you're running the app on web or not. If you're running it on Android or iOS or macOS, for example, that function will just be ignored. But yeah, this is probably the easiest way to get rid of that hashtag. So those are my learnings about Flutter 2.0. Let's now talk about navigation. So I started off with the original Navigator, and I'm not really going to show you anything special because you've probably already seen it a million times. So I don't have any examples here in the slides. I'm just going to show you the code in the project and also give a small demo of the web application using the original Navigator. So this is the code. I'm already going to run the application because it takes a while to start up. But yeah, I added the 3 ways of navigation here, but currently we're using a regular material app and then these 3 values. So we need a navigator key, an onGenerateRoute function, and also an initial route. That's important to keep in mind for later. I'm just going to run the app right now on Chrome. And you might see that I have to use no sound null safety here. And there's a reason for that. I'll also come back to that later. But yeah, using Navigator 1.0, the first thing I'm going to show you is the routes. These are all the routes in the app, and this is shared for all 3 ways of navigation. So we have the home, which is just /. We have login, which is just login. And then also here for unknown, this is actually our error. This is the route used for our error 404 screen. TV show and episodes are a bit more complex because they have parameters. So not only do we have the route, but also the name of the query parameter, and then 2 helper functions for Flutter Web. So we have a get TV show route function, and you can give a show name to it, and then it will create the URL for you. So TV show with a parameter and its value. And then there's also an additional function to which you can pass a route, and then it will parse the show name for you. And then basically here the same thing for the episodes. So we have the route, the query parameter, a function to get a complete URL, and also a function to parse the episode ID from a URL. And then one more helper class that you need to see is called initial route provider. The only thing it does is check whether the user is signed in or not. If the user is not signed in, we return the login route. And if the user is signed in, we return the home route. Now let's take a look at the router itself. I think it's called app router. This is the interface. So what do we have here? The things that you also saw in the material app here. So navigator key, onGenerateRoute, and initial route. Those will be provided by our app router. And we also have these 3 helper functions for showing the home screen, showing the TV show screen, and for showing the episode screen. Now you might wonder why we have both an episode ID here and a full episode object. That's for the hero animation that you saw in the beginning. So the special animation for going from the home screen to the detail screen, you just path the episode to the detail screen. And because it's already loaded, you can show that beautiful animation that you saw. But if you're on Flutter Web and you just type in the URL of an episode, the episode won't be loaded in immediately. You can parse the episode ID from the URL, but the episode won't be available. So that's why it's also nullable here. Then the implementation of the app router. Router impl. We have the initial route provider that I showed you. We have a navigator key that you can just get. Now we have the onGenerateRoute function. This will always return a material page route, but first we need to fetch the correct screen from the URL, and that's where we have this function for. So the route can be nullable. So let's say it's null, then we just return the unknown screen or the error 404 screen. I'm going to go over TV show and episode lost because those are special cases. But for other routes like home and login, we just check if the route is the home route or login route, and then we return the corresponding screens. And if no valid route was found, we just return the unknown screen. Then for TV show, let's say that the user already has launched the app and is on the home screen and wants to go to the TV show screen. Then we pass these TV show screen parameters. So we don't need to do any parsing from the URL. Let's say we're on web and the TV show route is the initial route. Then we'll need to parse the show name from the URL. And let's say that it's not possible to pass the show name for some reason. Then we just return the unknown screen. Same thing here for the episode. So the first thing we try is check whether the navigation occurred during an app session. If so, then we can just use the episode screen parameters. If not, then we'll have to pass the episode from the URL. And if that fails, then we'll just return the unknown screen. Then we have the initial route provided by the initial route provider that I showed you. So just if the user is signed in, we return the home screen. If the user isn't signed in, we return the login screen. And then the 3 helper functions. So for show home, we use push replacement named because you can only go to the home page from the login page. And when you go from login to home, we don't want the login screen anymore in the backstack. So we push a replacement instead of pushing it over it. And then for the TV show, we first create our parameters. Then we create a formatted route, and then we just use push named. Same thing here for the TV show episodes. Now let's see how that works. So this is the login screen. You have to enter something, doesn't matter what. If you don't enter anything, you'll get this snack bar at the bottom showing that both fields are required. I just enter some values. And when we click login, you can see that we go to the home screen. Same thing as with web. It's not really made for web just yet. It's mostly meant for mobile devices. But all the logic is there. Everything works. We just probably need to provide a different layout. Some things you have free by default are special cursors. For example, this is a clickable item, this card. You can see that the cursor changes to a, not sure what that's called, some kind of click cursor. And yeah, it just works as you would have expected. Works the same as on Android, iOS, macOS, any other platform. And when we click an episode here, you'll see that we have the nice animation. And when we click show all episodes, we're directed to this screen, and you can just keep doing that actually. So we can, we were on the second episode, now we're on the third one. We can also go to the fourth one. And then if we want to go back, let's say that we use the navigation from Chrome itself, we can see that it actually works as you would expect. But then we try to forward again, you see that it doesn't work. That's because we're using Navigator 1.0. It wasn't really built with web support in mind. But yeah, now that I showed you the codes and the application, I think we can go back to the presentation. So you saw that it works. Why would you change it for something like Navigator 2.0? Well, as I said, it's not really made with Flutter Web in mind. I had to provide some hacky functions, you could say, to make sure that the ID of an episode and the name of a show can be parsed from the URL. And also the buttons don't really work as you would expect. And also it requires hacky workarounds for backstack manipulations. So if you've ever worked with something like deep linking in your Flutter application, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's quite difficult to keep track of the backstack. So Navigator 2 was introduced in September 2020. And what does it actually fix? Well, it has web support and it gives you full control over the backstack. So it basically fixes everything that was broken, you could say, in Navigator 1.0. And also something nice about it is that it's backward compatible with Navigator 1.0. So this all sounds pretty good, right? It just fixes the problems that you have with Navigator 1.0. But is there a cost to it? Well, this is a diagram showing you how Navigator 2.0 works. I wish I had my cursor to show you things, but apparently I don't. Yeah, this looks pretty complex. Navigator 2.0 is pretty complex, but I'll try to explain it to you as easy as possible. So you have the operating system. This can be Android, iOS, web, macOS, doesn't really matter. And then you can pass the initial routes, or when a navigation event occurs, a new intent to the route information provider, which is going to send it to the route information parser. And this is where some magic happens. This is where the route, so basically a URI, is converted to an object. I'll be able to show it to you later to make it more clear. But let's say that you open a TV show route. The route information parser will turn it into an object, and it will have the show name, the value for show name available for the router delegate. So yeah, everything from the route information parser is sent to the router delegate, and that is the main component of the way Navigator 2.0 works. The back button dispatcher follows this a similar flow. So on the operating system, you press a back button, and the back button dispatcher would just tell the router delegates to pop a route, but the popping itself happens in the router delegate. And then above the router delegate, you see the app state. The app state is basically a list of page objects, and the page is an instance of a screen, you could say. So the router delegate knows about the entire backstack because it contains the list of pages, and it is also able to modify it. One thing that isn't on this diagram is a flow from router delegate back to the operating system, and that's only used on Flutter Web, or I think at the very least. It's when you change the screen, also the address in the URL bar has to be changed. So this misses from the diagram, but yeah, it looks pretty complex. But you don't need to worry about everything, at least not when you're just starting out. The route information parser and the router delegates are the only ones of which you need to provide your own instance. You can just use the default route information provider and the default back button dispatcher. Maybe if you have something special you need to do, you might have to override them, but in the beginning, you can just use their default implementations. So I'm going to show you the code again, and then also a demo. So let's go back to app. Let's comment everything that has to do something with Navigator 1.0. That's all of this. And then for Navigator 2.0, we have to use a special constructor, or actually a factory, the router one here for material app. And we need this. That's the router delegate and the route information parser. The routes are still exactly the same. So the next thing I have to show you, actually, let me just run the app first, make sure that it's ready. In the interface, the object that is created in the route information parser is something I just call app path. And in some basic example, this will just be an enum with all the screens, but because we have parameters, like for example, the show name and the episode ID and the episode, I created a sealed class using freeze. So yeah, there's one for each screen, and it also has all the parameters. So then we have the next part. I was waiting for this for the web to load. We have a couple of, oh, yeah, this sometimes happens. Not sure why, not sure if it's related to Flutter 2.0, but sometimes it just failed to launch the web application. But if you try it again, it works without a problem. I haven't really looked into it yet. But what was I saying? We have the app path object, and then the next thing we need to talk about is the route parser. So you pass a string. You can also pass a URI if you want to, but I implemented it with a string. You just pass it to this function, parse route, and then it just does some of the same logic that you saw before. So if the URI equals routes home, you just return the home app path. If it's login, you return the login app path. And then also for unknown, yeah, if the URI doesn't match anything, we can just return the unknown app path. But then here for TV show and for episodes, we first need to parse the show name and the episode ID from the URL before we can actually create the TV show app path and the episode app path. It's really behaving quite strangely. Just giving it a third attempt. The next thing is, because it's only a helper class, is actually the information parser itself. So it has two functions. One is for converting a route to an app path, and the other function is basically the other way around. So for converting an app path to a route. I just showed you actually this parse route function. And what this function does is just basically create the URL based on an app path. Then the router delegates, where most of the magic happens, or at least normally. I actually extracted some of the logic away again. This time it worked, I think. I abstracted some of the logic away to the route page manager that I'll show to you in a moment. And what else do we have? We have the navigator key, same as before. We have a function current configuration, which is just the current path. We have a function for setting the initial routes and the new routes. And then we also have this build method here. So what does this look like? It has a change notifier provider of the route page manager. And every time its value is updated, this navigator will be rebuilt. And this navigator has the navigator key, the on-top page function, and also the app state, so the list of pages. And this on-top page function is nothing special. You just check if popping works, and if it does, it just passes that to the page manager. So now probably the most complex class that you'll see this evening, or at least during this presentation, is a route page manager. So first we have a couple of keys, but I'll get back to those in a moment. We have the route parser that I showed you, also still the same initial route provider, the navigator key, and then the list of pages. By default, it can be empty. You need to be able to get a list of pages, but we don't want the outside to be able to manipulate it, so we return an unmodifiable list. To get the current path, we just have to check in the list of pages which is the last item, and then get its name. The name is basically the route. And if we parse the routes, well, then we get our app path. And then this one is a bit tricky. It's for setting the initial route. So let's say that the initial route is home, which it is by default when you start up the app. Then you actually need to perform your check to see if you're signed in or not. So we let the initial route provider handle that. We let it return the initial route. But otherwise, let's say the initial routes, if you're on web, the initial route can also be, for example, the TV show screen. Then you can actually set it with a, then you can actually just set that path. You can completely ignore this check here. And then set new route path is also a bit complex. For example, let's say we pass the app path home. What we want to do is check if it's already in the backstack. If it's in the backstack, we can just pop. If it's not in the backstack, we have to add it first. And then we have to remove all other pages that are currently in the list of pages, because home should be the route of our app. And let's say something is underneath it, we actually want to get rid of it. So where does this value key come from? Well, every page has a unique value key. And we pass it a value from up here, or at least for home. We can just give it the home key. And that's why we have to make sure that there's only one instance of home in our backstack. The same thing goes for the login screen and also the unknown screen, or not necessarily in the unknown screen. But then the two special cases again are TV show and episode. So yeah, here we create a unique value key using the key mentioned above and also the show name. And then something we check is if this the screen is already in the backstack, we're just going to pop until it is visible. And if it isn't available, we just push it. Same thing goes for episode. And then here at the end, we call notify listeners, because that's how we update our navigator in the routes in the router delegate. And we have this helper function add page for adding a material page. Or the pop function, which just removes a page from the list of pages. And then we have these three helper functions again. For show name, we can just pass the app path. And for the others, actually, you can just do the same thing, because now everything is handled inside of this big set new route path function. So this explanation was probably pretty complex. Now let's see how it works. So we're just going to enter some values here, click sign in. And something that is different from the Navigator 1.0 implementation is that because the screen, or a unique screen is for example, the episode screen is a unique based of its episode ID. If we show all episodes and we click on episode 3, this is a new one. Now you can see that that we navigated to a new page. But for example, if we click episode 2, which is the one we come from, we actually navigate back. So yeah, it's a bit difficult to have multiple screens in the backstack with the same values. Same thing here, if we click on show all episodes, which is already in our backstack, instead of navigating forwards or pushing something, we actually pop until the screen is visible again. So yeah, that's basically the only difference. Let's go back to the slides now. So Navigator 2.0, although it fixes some issues from Navigator 1.0, it has some problems. It is fairly complex, and you have to write a lot of boilerplate code. And also, honestly, there aren't any good examples on how to use it in a large app right now. There are some small examples, but they're mostly copied from each other. And I haven't found any examples on how it's used in a really large app with, let's say, over 20 screens or something, and which also has a deep linking and other things. So how do we resolve these issues? Well, the Flutter community has been very active. A lot of people have been working on packages that are actually wrappers around Navigator 2.0 to make life easier. So we have AutoRoute, we have Flow Builder, which is created by Felix Angelov, the creator of the famous Flutter block package. We also have Fluro, which has been around for quite some time. And then there's also PageRouter, which is created by someone who works at Google, but it's not an official package. So that's something to keep in mind. And there's probably many others, but the one we're going to focus on is AutoRoute. And we're just going to dive straight into the code. Let me switch to the screen. And what do we need to comment out? Everything from Navigator to here. And then we'll just use everything from AutoRoute. And then I can use the Flutter run command again. Hopefully it works from the first time. But yeah, let me show you all the code you need to write with AutoRoute. So this is what it looks like. You create a class. I named it app autorouter. This $sign is important for code generation. And then what you do is annotate it with adaptive autorouter. Adaptive autorouter will make sure that if you're on iOS, then Cupertino transitions are used. And if you're using Android or web, that material transitions are used. Okay, I think it's working from the first time, which would be nice. So yeah, what was I saying? Adaptive, just make sure that the correct transitions are used on every platform. The first function here will replace a special word with another word while generating the routes. So for example, we have a home screen provider. Screen provider will just be cut from it, and the route that will be generated for us will just be called home route. And then the same thing for login screen provider. Screen provider is dropped and route is added. So login screen provider will get a login route. Then for every URL that is not recognized, we use this asterisk here to redirect the user to the unknown screen provider. And then with AutoRouter, that's actually one catch. So normally we can use the initial route provider, but we can't because there can only be one initial route. So I set it to the home screen. But something we can do instead is add a guard. I called it an auth guard. AutoRoute guard is provided by the AutoRoute package. And what it allows us to override a function called canNavigate. And in it, we perform our check, the same check as in the initial route provider. So if the user is signed in, we return true because the user can navigate. If the user isn't signed in, we push our login route instead, and we just return false. So that's all the code you need to write, and the rest is just generated for you. So let me show that to you real quick. The first thing is a list of possible pages that can be used in our backstack. Next item here is all routes in our app. And then here at the bottom are all the routes that are generated. So for the home route, we can see that its name is home route because it dropped screen provider and just added route to it. And we also see the path that is assigned to it. And then the two special cases, TV show route and episode route, we can see that there are also these query parameters. So for this one, show name, and for episode, we have episode ID. While it is still possible to pass an episode ourselves. So that's really nice. So yeah, that's all the code you need to write. Let's see how it works. So we start here again, which as we expected, we land on the login screen because we're not logged in. Let me just enter some values and sign in. And then the only difference between the native Navigator 2.0 implementation is that we can actually have multiple instances of the same screen in our backstack. So we are currently on the Flash Season 7, Episode 2. If we go to all episodes and we click on this episode again, so Season 7, Episode 2, it's added to our backstack again. So if I press back twice here, we'll see that we weren't navigated back the first time and that the two instances of the same screen were actually in our backstack. That's the only difference. That's probably because AutoRoute uses value keys in a different way than I did in my vanilla Navigator 2.0 example. So let's go back to the presentation. So the good things about using Navigator 2.0 with AutoRoute is that it uses Navigator 2.0 under the hood. It's way easier to use and you have to write a lot less boilerplate. And something I didn't show you is that it also has support for tabs. So let's say that your home screen has a bottom navigation bar with a couple of items. You can easily provide support for those tabs using AutoRoute. And it also works brilliantly on the web. It's unfortunate that I don't have an example prepared. But what's unfortunate, it uses code generation, which is okay, I guess. But I think we can all agree that the less code generation we have in a project, the better. And also something that is bad, well, more like unfortunate, is that it hasn't migrated to Null Safety yet. The contributors are still working hard on it. But that's also why, if I stop screen sharing for a moment, that I have to run the app with unsound Null Safety. It's just because of this package. If I would remove it, I would be able to run with sound Null Safety. So what I didn't tell you about, I told you that one of the things that Navigator 2.0 fixes is that it's easier to manipulate the backstack. And I wasn't really able to show this to you with the current example. So for example, how we can use it effectively for deep linking. Well, there is a person called Dominik Roskowski. He's really nice. He's a Google developer expert in Flutter. And at DroidCon, DroidCon at the end of last year, he also gave a talk about Navigator 2.0 in Flutter. So I highly recommend to check that out for some great examples on how you can manipulate the backstack effectively. So the conclusion, if you're only going to remember one slide from this presentation, I hope it's this one. So Navigator 1.0 is okay for current Android and iOS projects. I don't really think there's a need to upgrade as soon as possible. But you should at least consider looking into it. And also you should consider looking into it for new projects. Because then everything will already be set up and you don't have to rewrite anything in a new project. Navigator 2.0 is definitely an improvement, but it's also a lot more complex. So that's why I would also recommend to use a package that's a wrapper around Navigator 2.0, like AutoRoute that I showed you. But that's everything I have for you today. So I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself or if you have to write them in the chat. Don't currently see the chat. Don't really like Zoom.
Hi, Bram.
Great info. You're welcome. Hello.
All right. Yes, I have a quick question actually. Have you tried using have you tried using Navigator 2.0 with nested navigators?
I haven't. I don't really have any experience with it. I can only tell you that I read in the documentation on AutoRoute that there is support for it. So yeah, I dabbled with it with Navigator 1.0 and it was fairly complex in my opinion. But yeah, I think that at least by using a package, it's going to be a lot easier.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks. Oh, I just had like a little thing that I noticed. I was working with I was migrating this morning our RX Dart as well, and I noticed that you can actually still use the dot value on a subject, but you have to change your import because the value, actually it moved to a extension function, which is currently in another sub package. And under the hood, it just does the same, but it might make the code a little bit easier to read.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't look any further into it. I thought we would have to get used to using those value wrappers. Yeah, thank you for letting me know, letting us know. Any other questions?
Just I dropped a link in the chat on the documentation for of the Flutter team that they're doing a usability research on the Navigator 2.0 code, because they had a lot of feedback that it's too complex and hard to use. So they're trying to experiment with a higher level API for doing that. And they also mentioned the page router package, which is their own experimental router built on top of Navigator 2.0. But they're definitely still investigating things, and so the APIs might still actually change.
All right, good to know that they're looking into making it less complex. I think it's really necessary. I'm not sure if Filip is here already.
Yes, I'm here.
All right,
Hello.
welcome, Filip.
Yeah, thank you. I was listening to that Navigator thing, so glad that people are looking into it. And so from what I know, Navigator 2, the API that currently is available is meant to be wrapped by a package. Basically, it was more of a like what's to make things possible than to make things easy. So you're exactly right. Let's use a package and not the API itself. Yeah. Well, hi everyone. My name is Filip. I'm a developer advocate on the Flutter team, and I was invited here by Brad and others to just answer questions and talk.
Really glad that you're with us, Filip. I'll give the stage to you. I'm not sure if you
if
you share your screen or anything.
I know no. I'm just I hope that's okay. I didn't prepare a presentation. I thought that even just Flutter Engage itself gave you about maybe 6 hours or probably more of presentations. So I thought it would be nice to just talk about stuff and have questions. I can start with some like high level stuff, but we don't have that much time. So if you have burning questions, I wanted to make it for you to ask.
Yeah, welcome, Filip. We received some questions, so maybe I can just shout them and we can see.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see them now. I'm sharing my screen, I guess.
Oh yes. I can see them. Yes, I was ignoring the biggest part of the screen.
Do you have any advice or good examples of architecture in Flutter apps, and what does Google actually recommend or Flutter recommend? Yeah.
Yes. So this is a multifaceted question, because on one hand, we do want to, of course, give recommendations, and we don't want people to be blindly stumbling, in the dark forest for something. On the other hand, we also recognize that A, everyone has a different preference. B, there's so many different types of apps that are built in Flutter now that it's impossible, even if we were really into recommending something, it would be impossible to just say one thing, right? And also, kind of historically, there's a lot of people already very happy with their approaches. But now I'm talking about, there's a spectrum of how deep you want to go, right? So on one end of the spectrum, I guess this is your right, then that's the use this package, put everything here, and this is like the most detailed kind of a recommendation. On the other side of the spectrum, this is basically do whatever you want. There is nothing, right? And I think we want to not be there, and we're already actually working with Brian, who's Brian Egan is a community member in Berlin, and he I think is the most famous for his Flutter architecture samples. So we've been working on first of all looking at the current state of like architecture in Flutter apps, meaning like what do people use at Google, in other companies, in the open source community, in small apps, large apps, and figuring out if there are any things that can be extracted, right? And then finding a good balance between not recommending anything and recommending too much, and creating a new template. So you probably all know and love the template, the counterexample template, which is just one file. It is just a set state thing, right? And it is not particularly like best practices, but it is really valuable for you if you're coming new to Flutter. It's really good because you literally have one file which you can read in 5 minutes, and you understand how well. I didn't understand everything obviously at first, but you kind of can start fiddling around with this, and it's very easy. So we're keeping that. We'll still have the kind of the starter template, right? But we're also introducing, hopefully pretty soon, we'll introduce a template that will be called something like skeleton or scaffold or something like this, and that will be a template that still doesn't force you any kind of package, but at least it's like, okay, so basically all the approaches out there are some kind of MVC pattern, like like whatever you do, it's basically a model view controller. Different approaches give it different names, and of course there are other approaches as well, but like even the more like reactive, like RxDart, even that you can still kind of think about it as an MVC. So that's what we're saying. Like we're like, okay, so like the basics are you have a model, you have a view, which is your widget, and then you have a controller. And that controller, in our case, like in our like very sparse template, is just a change notifier, and that's it. Or value notifier, I can't remember. Something that comes with Flutter itself. And you can still, of course, like keep using that, but we recommend looking at other architectures and choosing the one that you like. But at least you get file structure, and that is really important. People don't know where to put their files, and how to structure them, right? You see a lot of people just kind of going with the easiest thing. So like, this is where I'll put my widgets, this is where I'll put my models, and then there's main.dart or something. And that's fine, but I think there are better ways to structure apps, especially ones that go over some size. So yeah, so that's the plan. We don't want to force any kind of like package on anyone, but on the other hand, we do want to let you kind of flow into Flutter and in some nicer way than just kind of throwing you into the water. Does it answer the question?
I think so. I saw that Tristan has raised his hand. I think you still have to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I have maybe a follow-up question about architecture. I was wondering if we need to organize the code so that we provide adaptive layouts, because we have an example of apps for the web. Still, we the layout that is provided here is more suitable for mobile devices, because on a larger screen, on the browser or on the desktop, you have much more space to fill. And I believe that we're not going to fill it the same way we are going to fill it on the mobile devices, So
Yes.
I was wondering if how we should, beyond the application architecture, how should we organize the code so we can provide different layouts for different.
Right. Yes. Yes. This unfortunately, we wanted to do that exactly with the template. We wanted to just like show you how you could do exactly that. So like generally you would have like a layout builder, and then you would have the widgets that for like let's say you have a list view, right? So on a mobile, you just have a list, and then you click on something, and it puts you into a detail thing that's on top of the list. You don't see the list now. On larger screen, tablet, desktop, web, you would have list here, and then the details are here, right? So that in itself is pretty easy. You have a layout builder, you find out what's going on, and then when you click here, and if you are in the layout, in the wider layout, you're basically showing the same thing, except instead of on a new screen, you're showing it inside a layout that's on the whole screen. But we realized that this is like good for one sample, but for a lot of apps, this will be more complicated, because you probably as your designer or you yourself, you want to do different things depending on what's going on, right? So like if it's like the simplest possible example, then layout builder is all you need. But once you want to do things, I don't know, like you might want to like link from one detail to another detail, and you want to update the list as you like jump from one detail to another detail. It starts to get complicated. You need to think about state management a lot, and so on and so forth. So we do like the template itself right now. The idea is that it won't be adaptive for different layouts. I mean, for different screen sizes and different types of devices. But we will have samples or tutorials that will help you go through that. But unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. There, you need to think about this deeply and in the context of your particular app. Makes sense? Yeah. So I guess that's. I'm open to other questions, but.
I saw a question in the chat from Tim, for example. Let me read.
Oh,
it.
Sorry, I'm ignoring the chat.
No problem. There is also a chat in Zoom. I would like to know your view on Android Jetpack and Flutter, and where Google is taking these two approaches. Will they converge?
Yes. So I think it's like, at Google we have this thing that has worked well for Google is where if you see an opportunity, you go for it, and like the best ones win, or not win, but like you can have different approaches to similar problems, and you'll see it's not very hierarchically structured company, which would be like, no, we just want this one thing and that's it, right? And that has helped Google before, because a good idea can turn out to not be that great. So the Android team saw I know that the Flutter team actually helped the Android team figure out how to exactly structure the Jetpack Compose. So you will see a lot of inspiration from Flutter in Jetpack Compose. We do still think that there are different approaches, even though, like, in many ways, like if you look just at the feature list, they're very similar. But Jetpack Compose, if you don't know, is something that will you can write in Kotlin. It will basically translate into like an Android SDK app, which then runs, and it's the Jetpack Compose architecture is a reactive or declarative architecture, same as Flutter. They do say that they will be also able to transpile or build apps for iOS and probably web. I don't remember. But I think the big difference here is that Flutter is a UI framework, which basically it like takes with itself the whole. It's like a rendering engine, right? Like it's like Unity. You take everything with you, and the kind of the substrate that from which Flutter came is like that. It's about, we have all these screens around us, you know, like you go into any room of your house probably, and you have like at least 2 screens, sometimes many more. And in the current world, it's like you have to think, oh, this screen is Android, that screen is, you know, Apple, that is a TV, but as you know, so it's very like everything is different. I like to explain it on sci-fi movies. If you look at a sci-fi movie, if there are screens presented in the sci-fi movie, they don't work like that. You come to a room, or the protagonist comes to a room, and she sees some display devices, but they're not. But she's never like, oh, that's a Windows device, and I have to install this thing so that I can, you know, put this. No, it's everything like works together, and it just kind of recognizes you as a person, and then your whole area where you are, whatever screen you are in, is your device, basically. And so that's kind of the, you know, it's a very lofty goal, but basically I think that's how technology should look like. We have so many screens now, they should all just be kind of like for us, and you should not think about what they're running on or anything like that. And Flutter is an enable for that, maybe, hopefully, in the future, where you can be, okay, so I don't really care what I'm running on as an app developer. It could be a Raspberry Pi, it could be a Toyota car, it could be iOS, Android, web, and it all kind of like is the same programming language, the same framework, everything is the same, and I can kind of like cover the room. So that's the vision beyond it, and I don't think everything is possible, but I think that Jetpack Compose is more like, okay, let's make it easier to build apps for Android and possibly other things. But I don't think it's even technically possible for them to like run on a Raspberry Pi. Well, it is possible. Like you can run if you want. It's a really good project. I think there is a article by Chinmay Garg that explains how you can build your own embedder of Flutter and run it on a Raspberry Pi. So yeah, I don't know if I've explained the problem, but basically we'll see. There could be overlaps. There definitely are overlaps right now, but the underlying approach is different, and we'll see which one is for which one is good for which use cases.
All right. Thanks. Let's maybe go to the next one. Is there sort of a certification for a Flutter developer yet, or are there plans to create it?
I think there is none. Mm-hmm. I know that we've been talking about it, And the last time I was part of this discussion, I think what we realized is that while would be nice to have, it's probably not something that the team will, in the short term, be focusing on, because it's I think in some ways, you know, there are companies that are good at this and they are doing certifications, and of course it's always better if like Google puts a stamp on something, but it's not you know, it's not the thing that holds us back, I think. So yeah, so there are no plans.
Yeah, maybe Arjen, you can maybe explain a bit, if you're still on the call, of course, why you are interested in such kind of things. Is that asked a lot or something?
I'll say that we do get a lot of questions from that, especially from places in Europe. In the US, the certifications are not as sought after, and but I understand that, like you want to show. For example, Microsoft does this a lot, right? Like Microsoft gives you a lot of like, you're a certified Microsoft something. So, and it's a valid, good approach. But again, like I hope that this is something that will kind of come out from the ecosystem maybe. And I'm not saying that we're not going to do it ever, but I don't think we're working on it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Now that Flutter Web is stable, is there an add-to-app support for web to create a separate component to be embedded in an existing web page?
Wow.
Or is this for the future?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you can, if you add it to an existing application and it's only one Flutter application that you're adding, it's probably also not easy, but it's good. It's probably doable. Like the add to app was also is also possible on iOS and on Android. So
yeah,
right. Maybe we still can go to the presentation then. There are also other questions. Yeah, which state management technique do you prefer? I think it's partly already discussed that it's quite open to choose your own thing.
Yes.
Do you have any advice on how designers, developers, and testers can work closely together using Flutter?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. I think it's weird because I've talked to a lot of people about this, and it seems like in some ways Flutter is breaking barriers because it's so. Some things are so much easier to iterate on, right? And some things are some things are possible that aren't very easy in other frameworks. This is because, again, like with Flutter, you get a rendering engine, so you can do anything with pixels. And so I think what I don't have a good answer, right? But one thing that I'm hearing, for example, is that a developer sometimes will work with a designer, and the designer will throw over ideas that, like, the designer is trained to just like throw over a thing, and that thing is probably, they know that this thing would be possible easily in like Android SDK or anything else, and if you really want to like go the extra step, I think one way to do it is to sit together with the designer and show them how you can iterate, and show them first like an ugly but very impressive tech demo, basically, right? So that they understand that, oh, okay, so I can actually have the button. That's a terrible example, but the button can be like rotating in 3D space, and that's possible in Flutter, and you can do it, right? And then I think you kind of like both sides of designer developer can train each other on how that works, and like being able to pair program quickly with a designer next to you is a very valuable skill. With testers, I'm not sure. I also think kind of that I myself for my projects that are not involved in Google, I use CodeMagic, which and I'm sure other CI/CD tools do the same. But basically, I'm used to have internal testers on Google Play and on iTunes Store, and I just like create a new version. I push it to CodeMagic. It will build it in like, especially now, it's like 20 minutes, and in 20 minutes it's on the phone of someone else and they can play with it, right? Even better, again, when we finally get out of this pandemic situation, I think being able to sit next to someone and just hand them a device that was just, you just hot loaded some change to it, and you just give it to them and they can work with that, is great. I'm talking about like manual testers, right? Of course, there's the whole idea of just automated testing, and we have the answer with, I'm not sure if you've talked about this, but we have the integration tests now, which is a package, but it's a package that's in the SDK. And that should make things much easier to test and develop. So yeah.
All right.
Question. I see. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm. But I see when I hear Flutter Web back in 2019, I was thinking the possibility of creating websites. 2021, I'm about to lose that hope. Am I wrong? That we are one day features for SEO and static state generation to catch the. Yes. So I think that's a great question. Right now, if you look at Flutter Web, it's basically made for a very specific piece of the web that is not the majority of it, right? And I'm afraid we're going to stay with that for at least like some time. What Flutter Web works for very well is apps like Rive or the iRobot thing that we featured at Flutter Engage, and other things where it's like Photoshop in your web browser, right? It's something that you run once. You don't need SEO for that because you're signed in, or it's not like content heavy. You're creating something with it. You do some stuff like it's probably kind of you need it to be pixel perfect. You have a bunch of tools and everything like that. So basically, it's a power user tool. For that, I think Flutter Web is great. And the fact that you can write it once for web and then you have immediately also have the desktop version and possibly the mobile version is fantastic. For websites, like for things where you are oh, and by the way, like for example, this Zoom, I'm using Zoom Web. I think that's another like good good example of that kind of app, right? But for a normal website where you have lots of text and basically it's mostly like a document thing, it's definitely not a good idea for Flutter Web. Not now, and possibly for some time in the future it will be hard to do this. And that's because like Flutter like literally is it's like web running on the web, right? The Flutter was created, the framework was created by people on the Chrome team who are like, how would we build the browser and the web if we knew what the web was gonna be in 25 years? And so they said, okay, you know what, we are going to just rip out everything from the browser. So they had this, I don't know if you've heard this, the origin story of Flutter before, but it was literally a way to make the web leaner and more performant. And they thought that, okay, so we'll shave off, like we'll see what makes the most sense to rip off from the web, and we'll see how that works, right? And so they said we have only 1 week or 2 weeks maybe to do that, and we'll see how that works. And so they did this for a week, I think. And in a week, they saw like 40% increase in performance just by ripping out some of the things. And they ripped out like the DOM, and they ripped out some of the older APIs. And so they thought, okay, so we have something here, so maybe let's try it again. They tried it once again in JavaScript, and then they said, you know what, let's build like a new engine for showing things that is kind of like the web, but much leaner and much more modern, and that's Flutter. So that's the fascinating thing. Like you can create, like when you have an Android app, it's just, I think the overhead is like 6.5 megs, but the 6.5 megs is basically you get a text engine, text rendering engine, you get Skia, you just get everything inside it, plus the layout engine and everything, and then you build on top of that. So if you do a Flutter web app, that's basically the web trying to run like a smaller version of the web. So it's a little there's definitely overhead. It doesn't, if you compare it to Svelte or anything like that, those things are like using the web as much as possible, obviously, and the rendering engine, everything like that, while this one is more about like we're trying to make this pixel perfect, and we're trying to make it as portable as possible. So I guess I'm talking too much, but there is definitely the team really wants things like SEO. It really wants things like making it start faster, but fundamentally it's much harder for Flutter to match that than for example, Svelte. On the other hand, I think that Flutter is unique in some other propositions, and that is pixel perfectness, portability, and just the fact that you immediately get a PWA that is usable and works on the web. Yeah.
All right. I think Tim had a question. Do you notice that the Flutter developers are currently coming from the Android world, and why do you think that iOS developers are more reluctant to try Flutter? Any good ways to convince them, actually?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I see that as well. We see that. And we have some iOS developers in the Flutter team, obviously, and in the material design team. And I think this is my own understanding, right? So we see a lot of people coming from the web and coming from Android. And I think iOS developers are just they don't have that much. How to say that? There's just they have a lot of confidence, and for good reasons. They have a lot of confidence in iOS and that they can make money and then they can be successful in that ecosystem. They on the web and on Android, there's a lot more shifting ground, and so people are more likely to look at other new things to do, especially on the web, right? Because on the web it's very hard to like make money by doing your thing, like for just building an app. On iOS, it's still possible to build your own app and make money from just selling it. So yeah, I guess that's probably the biggest reason, and we also see, we were looking at some like communities, right? And for some reason we see like the community around Android and the community about the web, but even like, for example, the community around Python is a lot more active. Like you see a lot more things going on that are community based, that are around these platforms or these technologies. On the iOS side, for whatever reason there is, there are still of course meetups about iOS development, but they are not as active as the ones on Android or web or Python or whatever you have. And I don't know why that is, but that's one reason why there's more of a like, okay, so we'll look at WWDC and see what they say, while in the Android ecosystem it's mostly like, yeah, we'll look at the IO stuff, but also like, let's go to DroidCon and listen to other people say what they like and what they build with Android. So that, I don't know if that's a good answer, but yeah. What do you think are the pros? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll let you answer the question.
No, just okay. What do you think are the pros and the cons to having a large set of dependencies at pub.dev to pick from versus having more provided by the framework?
Yes, I think that's a trade-off for sure. We do want to only work on stuff that nobody else can work on, basically, right? So if you have like only the Flutter team can work on stuff like making sure that the app works well on Metal devices on iOS, right? I mean, that's oversimplification, because in the end, I'm sure a pull request will come from the community, but it's like very hard for someone to get into the Flutter engine and the C code in there and Skia and so on and so forth, right? So that's something that like the Flutter team wants to focus on. And of course, there are other things that we want to provide as well, so that things are smooth. So we do want to have like a very good camera plugin, for example, because a lot of apps need that. But it's historically it's been very hard to find the people to do that and still have the people to do the core things. So and then there's the other thing, and that is when you have something in the core, like if you have something as a library, for example, in Flutter, then I think the saying is that the core library is where code goes to die. You know, it's like when you have something in the core library, that's then the possibility or ability for it to change is slashed by 90%, because you have to support this for basically forever. So that's why, like, being able to say, you know what, like, we don't have a Bluetooth like Bluetooth thing inside Flutter, but there are these 3 ecosystem packages, and all of them are little like better in different ways. I think that's the way to do it. And I know that a lot of people will not like that, because you'll say, well, Bluetooth is really important and you should have a package for Bluetooth that is by the Flutter team. But ultimately Flutter is a UI framework. It's about splitting pixels on the screen, and and we provide that interface with whatever platform you're on. But at the end of the day, that will vary, and the different platforms are also moving and at different speeds. So you have to choose one, and Flutter team chose let's work on the stuff that only we can work on. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Then maybe we can still have one question, because we're a bit running. Nice,
Mike.
Now that web and desktop are stable and null safety has arrived, what do you think is the next big thing for Flutter?
Right. Well, so first of all, I should say we're not allowed to talk about future plans that are not already out there on GitHub, right? But I think you see it every year. Or every cycle, that we have some big announcements, some new features come to Flutter, and then the next big thing is basically maintenance and making things smoother for everyone. And so that's the next big thing. It's kind of for some people that might be disappointing. I actually think this is really good, that you stabilize, you make sure that things really work well, you make sure that not all the rough edges, but the most rough edges you kind of polish. And so that's, I think, the next big thing. Like all right, we are now at what, 6 platforms. I think that's enough. We have all these, like, we have new Null Safety, which will take time for sure for a lot of people to hop on and to really, like, even understand or wrap their heads around that. And you want to just make sure that things are, like, nicer and stable. If you look at, for example, what the Dart team is working on in the next few months, these are very small, small but very nice things to have. So, for example, one of them, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it basically, from your perspective, you don't do anything, but you get a little better inference when you're using closures inside, like, for example, a chain of calls, right? And so it's like you probably don't even notice that there's a new thing. It's just like, oh, well, okay, well, I didn't that just worked, and that's it. So I hope that that's the next big thing for Flutter.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I also saw some articles about the iOS is lagging a lot, and I think there is also a project in Flutter that is taking care of that. It's not yet in.
So that's actually a really, really interesting one, if I may, because there's if you haven't heard about it already, there is a problem with if you run your app on iOS for the first time, and there's a lot of shader compilation going on, which is basically many people don't even realize that that's what happens when you start your app. Then it needs to compile shaders. Then it can be janky. So there are people who are like, oh, my app is faster on Android or even on older iOS devices than it is on newer iOS devices because it janks at first. And it's true. There is a problem where before we were able, with OpenGL, we were able and still are able on Android to compile the shaders like for the first time, and then just use them, and therefore everything is smoother, right? We have good documentation about this, by the way. Like if you want to make sure that even older Android devices are jank free, you can compile the shaders on your device and then ship the shaders with your app. It's called SKSL shaders. You can Google it. Anyway, that's not possible currently with Metal devices, which is basically all the newer iOS devices. And that's a problem because then, like, every time you create, open a new iOS app, then it can be slower. And this is obviously exacerbated by things that, like, for example, if your app is already a little slow, then if it also needs to compile shaders, then it will be even slower. So there are people who are understandably very angry because they built an app and that app worked just fine, and now suddenly that same app on a newer device works worse, and especially at the first few seconds, right? And so and the Flutter team has been working on this for 9 months now, at least, and it's a hard problem, because what Flutter is based on is we let you do anything, so therefore we can't just build like 5 shaders and be done with it. Whatever you come up with, we need to build a shader for. So there are many approaches. We're actually looking at, I think, 3 parallel approaches, and whatever is best, maybe all of 3 will need to be used for this. But anyway, it's a big problem. We know about it. There are ways to avoid it. One of them, of course, is generally having a good performance of your app. We've seen that a lot of people who are like, that iOS jank is terrible, I do something about it, and then we looked at the app and it was not the iOS, it was their app being slow, which again, like, that's understandable, but so not all the iOS jank thing is really iOS jank. But that said, it's still there. I don't want to minimize it. It's still there. It's a big problem, and basically you have to kind of think, which is something that we never wanted you to have to think about, shaders. And so if you have an app that immediately, like, it starts and it immediately starts doing things like, oh, I want to show an animated SVG, I want to have blur, and I want to have like animation with transparency and stuff like that, then that's really taxing for the device. And like, all these things need to have shaders compiled at the start of the app. So you want to avoid that, and that sometimes has to flow into design decisions as well. Like, do we really want to do we really want to have all that stuff happening at the same time, and so on and so forth. Also, we've seen that especially apps that are meant for emerging markets, they try to avoid having like big download sizes, and so therefore they opt into something like for example, SVG graphics, right? So SVG graphics are really small, but they also need to be like built. They must build a shader for that graphic to work. So therefore, it's a trade-off. If you're making an app that is meant mostly to be used in India, for example, then then you might think, okay, you know what, I'll just use SVGs, and it will be a little worse for newer iOS devices, but at least people will be able to download it. So yeah. Anyway, so that's that.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I think we're a bit running out of time, but that's of course no problem. But I want to thank you very much, Filip, for joining us. Also, thank you, Bram, for the inspiring talk you gave. And also thanks everybody for joining, of course. And see you next time, and have a good evening. And have a good day, Filip, because I think it's about 9 o'clock there.
Yes, yes.
You're just starting the day. Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.